Well, that is a very good question. First of all, yes, there is a party called SPLM. It is registered and it is there. It's nominal, but it is not ruling. It is a misnomer actually to call it a ruling party. There is a ruling family and there is a ruling man, but there is no ruling party in South Sudan as we speak. The SPLM doesn't sit down and make decisions who is going to be fired today, who is going to be hired tomorrow. That decision doesn't come to the party. For you to actually rule as a party, it is your program that that you design, and then you bring in your cadres who are going to run it. That's when you are called a ruling party. The SPLM right now, first of all, does not have a political or economic program that the government uses. The nomination and appointment of people and firing of people doesn't involve the SPLM. And so what I can say is that the position of the SPLM Secretary General is performative. There is nothing, there is no power behind it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Kurthi TV. Today, I have someone you're all familiar with. He doesn't need an introduction, Abraham Awolich. So, we'll be talking about a range of issues surrounding mostly decision making and power in J1. We'll also touch on the recent visit by Nathaniel Oyet of SPLM-IO. And we'll also talk about the incident in Addis when the president attended the African Unit Summit. So, and then the confusion in decision making. These are the things we'll discuss. I'm glad to have Abraham Awolich. So, welcome to Kurthi TV.
Thank you very much, Brother Quir, for the opportunity to be here and to share with you.
Okay. So, I want to begin by asking you a general question about the situation in South Sudan. So, you can choose which one you want to highlight. So, what is your assessment of the situation now between SPLM, IO, and then the government of South Sudan represented by SSPDF, especially in Akobo? What is your assessment?
Well, generally, thank you very much for the opportunity again to speak to you and to people who will listen to this show. Welcome and thank you for listening. Regarding the situation in South Sudan, the situation remains worrying. Obviously, the country is in the state of war, and as we speak, it looks like from the beginning of the year, the SPLM-IO had a momentum, but now the government has rolled back that momentum and appears to take more than it was taken from the SPLM-IO. And so the SPLM-IO are not in a very strong position at the moment in regards to that confrontation, and makes sense. The government has logistics, it has the sovereign power, and the SPLM-IO are operating with little whatever they have. And I think whatever they had got exhausted in the early days of the confrontation. And so my assessment is that yes, the government appears to have the upper hand in Jonglei, but it doesn't mean anything in regard to the war itself. The war doesn't end with the government taking over Kobo and all the areas that were previously held by the SPLM-IO. SPLM-IO, they probably are somewhere there in the jungle waiting for an opportunity to make a claim or to stake a claim down the road. And so technically the country is still at war, and the economic conditions as well as security conditions in the country are getting worse. As we have seen, recent events in Vietnam and other places show that the country is still technically at war, and insecurity remains a major challenge as it has always been.
Okay. So the capture of Kobo by the government and the SSPDF forces, do you think that is something that is going to be sustainable, or is it just a setback for SPLM-IO?
Well, I really don't know what capacity the SPLM-IO has. And when they initiated the offensive, obviously in response to sustain operations against them, against their own organization in the cantonment sites in and around Juba and other places, they had to respond. But it looks like they did not have the logistics to sustain the operation or to be able to defend their own positions. And so it will take time for them to regroup and reorganize themselves and mount any significant operations. Whether they can reverse government gains or not, that I cannot assess. But what I know is that that is just the nature of you win or lose each battle, but it doesn't end the war. The war will continue in some shape or form until you find a political solution.
At the end of the day, what many South Sudanese want, and all South Sudanese, is peace, that this war ends. But it looks like both sides do not actually want to look at it this way. The SPLMIO would blame the government that they abrogated the peace, or they are not interested in peace. The government of South Sudan sees itself as a sovereign force that is protecting the country. So at the end of the day, they are not looking at the interest of the people, as what happened in Abiy shows. So what do you make of that in the context of peace, or in the context of general leadership in the country, where people say, this is our country?
Well, the political leaders obviously have incentive to keep violence and to keep political uncertainty in place, because that's the only insurance against being taken out of power. If you were to subject yourselves, considering the failures that have been registered by the country since independence and how the whole thing deteriorated, democratic elections are not going to keep these people in power. And so the tool they have in their hands is to keep this violence going in some shape or form. And peace for them is a tentative issue. So should there be international pressure, you can give a lip service to peace. You can say, okay, I have agreed to make peace. But now when you have the paper in your hands and you have the actors, and when the dynamics begin to shift on the ground, you change your mind about peace. So I think that until something significant happens to force their hands, war appears to be in their interests, even though it doesn't serve the economy well and it does not serve long-term viability of the state very well. Politics is all about short-term gains, and if they can achieve that, that's what they are likely to choose. And we have seen that consistently. Each time we have a peace agreement and people are drawing toward an election, we always seem to find ourselves in conflict. And it is by design. It is not this war, for example, that we are in now. Yes, the government would like to say, well, the IO are the ones that return the country back to war, but we all know it unfolded in our very eyes. It was designed to result in this conflict. And so there is no interest in Juba to pursue a genuine peace and to pursue national unity through negotiations. They want the kind of peace that they can dictate according to their own terms. So they can pick and choose the kind of peace they want because they have the military and political leverage to do so. So I'm afraid that we are not going to see stability anytime soon.
For SPLMIO, they don't have to worry about diplomatic issues. But what is the diplomatic cost for Juba? Because at the end of the day, they're a government. They don't have to worry only about the regional leaders, because regional leaders are people who are just like them. So whatever Juba does is something other regional leaders can do. For example, Museveni. Whatever Juba does in terms of war, it is something he can do. So they're not worried about regional leaders. But how about internationally? Are they not worried about the diplomatic cost of this war?
Well, they have renewed to international and diplomatic pressures internationally because no one seemed to have incentive enough to take action in the event that the government of South Sudan does not consistently do what it promises in the diplomatic environment, in the diplomatic community. And so, in my view, there is a possibility that they could, by mistake, misread the political environment as we are now, this global political environment is very, very unpredictable, and things could go the wrong way. For example, in the last few weeks, we have seen, the United States imposing sanctions on Rwanda, something that was unexpected. And we are seeing a very tough language against Uganda. We don't know what will follow from that. And on the northern side of the country, we've seen Muslim Brotherhood and elements of Sudan government being considered, terrorist organization. Yeah, so there is something evolving within that international orbit. And South Sudan definitely is not in anybody's good books. So things could happen, which is why you have to resolve conflict, because in this global uncertainty, somebody could end up aligning with one of your rebels and oppositions as a choice to survive, and now you will have real war at hand. And so those are I don't know to what extent those calculations are made in Juba. But even if you are not afraid of any international backlash or regional pressure, what about your own citizens? Every single year, things get worse for them. Don't you think that at some point the hell is going to break loose, and things could really go ugly within the country? I think that is the group that I would worry about the most, because they have been on the losing end. The citizens of South Sudan have been on the losing end, losing lives, losing property, losing employment, losing their security, and even their own dignity being lost. So at some point, something is going to give way, and hell is going to break loose, and the government will find itself in a very difficult situation. And so that is why committing oneself to a peace agreement that gives you an opportunity to restore peace and stability is the best way to go. But we have seen that President Kiir and his government, whether it is the national dialogue, whether it is the transitional constitution, or whether it is various peace agreements, including the Arusha agreement or the revitalized agreement, they have always temporarily accepted the conditions, but when they feel that they have other options, they opt out. And when they opt out, the country, the option, they are opting for war. That is very much what the default option is. When you opt out of an agreement, you are basically opting, you are not giving people a space to have discourse, civil, meaningful discourse. You are very much pushing people to take the extreme measure, which is violence. And so that is why I'm afraid that this situation is going to persist for quite a long time.
Okay, recently we've seen the acting chairman of SPLMIO in Washington. So there have been claims that he was invited by the United States Congress. So you've been there. So what is the context of his visit to Washington?
Well, as I cannot speak for the SPLMIO, they probably have better information than I do. What I know was that he was invited to attend the Summit of Sovereign Nations, which is a program affiliated with the U.S. government but run by an independent body. And it invites global leaders to talk about how their countries can work together as sovereign states. And the idea is to promote the idea of sovereignty as an important international concept. There is a possibility that while he's here, he is going to engage the U.S. government and the United States Congress. And I have seen very tough comments from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and also comments from the State Department about what is going on in South Sudan. So whether he was invited directly by the U.S. government, that I cannot say. I have no privy. I am not privy to that. But I know is that being here is an opportunity for him to engage diplomatically if he is there.
It's something that we'll try to find out from them. If they were invited directly by the U.S. Congress, that would amount to a shift in relations between Juba and Washington. And that I think should make them really, really worried. But we'll try to find out from them whether they were invited directly by the US government.
Right. I think South Sudan government has a very difficult relationship with the United States, partly because South Sudan never live up to what they promise. It's just something that South Sudan doesn't do. And many people have been sent to Washington to make efforts to try to engage. And when then they are asked to go home and do one or two things to show that they are serious, and nothing ever gets done. And so that has put the United States government in a difficult situation. For example, I'm privy to the debate, about whether to cut humanitarian aid completely. Those debates are being had, and of course, some people are saying, well, if we cut humanitarian aid completely, then it is only civilians who are going to suffer. But the other side of the debate is that if we keep paying for this and let Juba take the oil money and use it for whatever purposes that are not in line with the interests of their people, then we are very, very much bankrolling the government in Juba. So I think the Trump administration definitely has not paid a lot of attention yet to South Sudan and to Africa in general. But it is the recent visit of members of Congress with senior members of U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, followed by these statements, suggests that things could be changing from looking the other way to maybe paying more attention and getting people to pay for their actions. So there is a possibility for that.
You said the Trump's administration has not been paying attention to what is happening in South Sudan. So what are some indications that things may change?
Well, I'm saying that because there was a congressional visit recently, followed by the statements that were issued. So suggesting that maybe something that delegation might have come back with some reports about what is going on and why the United States may need to shift its policy. But for now, there is nothing tangible that I can say has been decided.
Is the failure in Juba, or is the failure a diplomatic failure in Washington, D.C.? For example, those in Washington, D.C. have to engage with the diplomatic community in Washington, D.C., whether they are from the U.S. or international diplomats. Or is it something coming from J1 that dictates what the people in Washington do? So where's the failure here? Why is it that the relations between the U.S. and South Sudan, that has been historically really, really good since the mid-1990s, has gone this way? What is really happening? What is the breakdown coming from?
Well, the breakdown is on the side of Juba. Juba not being able to be truthful about what is going on and not being able to take decisions that are needed to move the country out of violence. This is the main concern of the United States, that Juba needs to end corruption. We have seen corruption growing. Juba needs to end violence. We have seen violence growing. Juba needs to respect its international obligations, such as the peace agreement. Nothing has happened. We have seen Juba was asked to improve humanitarian access to some places, and there has been persistent obstruction to humanitarian access, and so on and so forth. And of course, Juba has been asked to prosecute people who have committed gross human right abuses, and that has been very slow. Nobody has been arrested or prosecuted for these crimes, and crimes continue to be committed. And so there is a long list of international demands on what South Sudan needs to do in order to improve its diplomatic relations. For example, every single year, Juba tries to push the international community to lift the arms embargo. But there is a checklist which was provided through a UN resolution that if you do this and that, then the possibility of arms embargo being lifted is greater. But is that checklist for the last however long, that checklist has not been met. Nobody works on it. They only think about it once the time to renew the arms embargo on South Sudan is up. That's the only time they look at it. If I were them, that should be my Bible. They have asked me to do this. You throw the ball to them. You say, I have done it. Here is the report. Come and verify it. And now the action is on your side. They've never tried that. And so there is a roadmap, diplomatic roadmap, some of which we know, some of which we may not know because they are state secrets, that South Sudan is obligated to do in order to improve relations. But they never do. For example, I'm just giving you an example. There was recently an engagement, a diplomatic opportunity to engage when the United States imposed visa restrictions on South Sudan. And the restrictions, the South Sudan did engage and promised to do certain things. For example, allowing some people to be deported. But instead of now saying, okay, this is an opportunity now to push for more, what they were pushing was for sanctions against individuals to be lifted. That was the top diplomatic priority for South Sudan. And they had to pay a significant amount of money, and we have seen the papers circulating about who was contracted and what the contract was about. And so you can see that window of opportunity was squandered trying to cater for the interests of an individual rather than pushing for the interests of the state. So that was a missed opportunity. There was a window and there was a level of engagement, but it was squandered. And so that's what makes it difficult for sustainable diplomatic engagement with South Sudan.
Is it that they don't know what to do? Or is it they don't care? Because it's one thing to say, to be sort of nonchalant about SPLMIO, to say, okay, they can capture all the towns they want, but we will be able to come back and defeat them. So they can relax like they did when SPLMIO was sort of seeming to have a high hand in the war. But for this diplomatic issue, that's a different thing. Why do they seem not to be worried? Or have they just, thrown up their hand and say, okay, there's nothing we can do?
Well,
because this is a big deal.
Well, the type of things that they are asked to do are things that could appear to loosen their grip on power. Things such as work on the constitution, you do the transitional justice, you prepare for elections. So they directly affect their grip on power. And that is why they look the other way. Or saying implement the peace agreement. Implementation of the peace agreement obviously does lead to loosening the grip of power on the individual or one person controlling power. And so that's why there is a challenge. Or asking people to stop corruption is very much telling somebody not to wire money into their account, and that is not in their interest, personal interest, even though it is in the interest of the nation. And so sometimes when people like us talk, they would say, we are not patriotic and all of that. But really, if you cannot do something that benefits the interests of the whole country, and it is only your benefit, I think that is the most unpatriotic thing to do than somebody speaking out. Yeah, so really the resistance to open up a political space, allow people to participate, allow people to become part of the political process in a more meaningful way is actually what they are resisting, and that is what is being demanded of them.
Okay, Washington is experienced. They know this kind of states. Is it not possible for them to devise a diplomatic agenda that fits within the South Sudanese realities? Because I think they may expect some diplomatic concession from a state that doesn't really understand what they're trying to do. As you said, the window was missed because instead of trying to do something that is in the interest of the country, they were asking them to lift sanctions on individuals. That's self-serving. That's elitist. So sometimes we may also see Washington, are they being realistic really in what they expect from South Sudan?
Well, I think since 2017, Washington basically just throw in the towel. They very much say, these guys, we cannot nudge these guys into any other direction. So let them deal with their own situation until there is a credible internal opposition to this group of leaders. I think starting with the time of Obama, after the RCS collapsed and the country returned back to war, it very much people kind of step back and say, okay, so these guys are really unwilling to change course. Because initially people had assumed that the reason the country relapsed to war was just an accident, that certain things were miscalculated and the leaders made a mistake. And you would think that after they have gone to war, that mistakes were realized and that they were willing to come back together and restart. That was the opportunity of the RCS, and that was the opportunity of the SPLM reunification agreement. But when the government reneged on all those agreements, it became clear that this was not accident. This was not an accident. This was deliberate. It is an attempt to squeeze other people out of political space, and it's an attempt for one individual or a very small group of individuals try to hold on to power. So there was a divergence. It was no longer there was nothing really that the U.S. and South Sudan shared after that. The interest to pursue peace was not there. The interest to pursue democracy was not there. The interest to pursue financial reforms was not there. And so the U.S. faced a choice either to deal with this, confront these guys using its might, or to allow the situation to evolve with the hope that internal dynamics will be sufficient to bring about the change that is needed.
Here's where I become somehow a skeptic when it comes to Washington. They have all the tools. If they wanted to stop it, they could, in terms of sanctioning people who actually make decisions. But the people they sanction are not actually the heart of the decision making in South Sudan. So why don't they act? That's why sometimes I say, okay, if they wanted to deal with South Sudan in a way that is in the interest of South Sudanese, they could. So why don't they do this?
Well,
in terms of corruption, they know the banks.
Right.
So why don't they do that?
Well, they are in a better position to answer that, but my intuition is that very much they had a lot to do with how South Sudan was born. And so they felt there is an element of obligation to make sure that South Sudan succeeds, that South Sudan is successful, and it has not been successful. But then if they were to go around and force the hands of leaders and force them out, somebody could easily turn around and say, that's what they had wanted all along, is to have a state that they can control remotely and change leaders whenever they want and all of that. And again, South Sudan got in trouble, and we are coming out on the heels of the Iraq situation and the situation in Afghanistan. So United States became a little bit allergic to the allegations of regime change. And so if you see the language in Juba, and they have used it successfully, they have always accused anybody who raise objections to what they do as people harboring a regime change agenda. And the United States has always tried to say, no, that is not, we are not pursuing any regime change agenda. Yeah, so I think that the international environment and this idea of regime change became distasteful to many Americans. And so they did not want to see their government interfering in that way. And also there was no political leadership in Washington pushing for this. So it was being managed at a diplomatic level. And the diplomats usually, when they run out of tools, they just throw in sanctions. But now, if you want to sanction the head of state, then the next question they deal with is that if he shuts down the whole thing and cut communication, what happens? then we may be forced to do the worst, which is to forcefully change the government, and then which will result in the regime change thing that they don't want to do. So I think we haven't had at the very high level, even the high level of Secretary of State since the Obama time that has been interested in South Sudan. President Biden completely did not even think about it. And if you remember, the Trump first term is when we got the arms embargo. And so really there has been, Obama was the last president to engage on South Sudan, and he gave up on it. And when he gave up, he had the people that knew South Sudan. And so the new administrations really have very little reserve of individuals that are deeply involved in the South Sudanese situation. So we have a completely new political environment with the second term Trump administration.
There was a movement by South Sudanese against Khartoum. So South Sudanese were united. Today, that kind of movement doesn't exist because people are divided along political and tribal lines. So there's no concerted effort. So if one political group, gets up and says, okay, we need to do something to pressure Washington, so that kind of a political group within Washington comes up, then maybe you may have some congressmen and women who may come up and say, okay, we need to do something. Maybe pass legislation like the Sudan Act that changed the dynamic in the war between SPLA and Khartoum. But we don't have that now. So the problem between Washington and Juba seemed like a loss to South Sudan. But from what you're saying, it seems like it's working for the interest of the people in power.
Absolutely. The less interested Washington is, that is party in Juba. So that's what they want. Anything that raises attention of South Sudan here in Washington is completely, detested in Juba. They don't like it. They don't want it. They don't want anybody paying attention. The better, the more they fly under the radar, even if it means that people are getting bankrupt, the better for them. And so really for the political leadership, the current status quo in Juba, the less involved the African Union is, IGAD and the United States and Troika, the less involved they are, the better. And but for the people of South Sudan, the less these people are involved, that is a nightmare situation. It means that their suffering is being extended, and nobody appears to have a sympathy or concern for their flight.
So they will just let it go that way because it will keep them in power. The more Washington is not interested. That's very nefarious. That's very sinister. So now I want to come back to the issue of power in J1, because we are really confused. And what recently happened in Addis with the president, the speech and the way he was working, for many of us, that is really troubling. But for people around the president, they have all the reasons to say he's strong, he's healthy, but we know he's not. We don't know the details. So going back to what we used to discuss, who is exactly making decisions in J1, from what you hear?
Well, there is, what I can say is that definitely I agree with you. The president's physical and psychological or maybe mental capacity, we have watched it in slow motion over the last 5 years, has been declining. And there have been so many signs showing that this is the case. There was that debacle or fiasco at Kibaki's funeral. And then when he was the chairman of the East African community, he could not even articulate or pronounce or recognize people and the heads of states from other countries and their respective countries, leave alone being able to deliver a speech. His speeches are laughed at across the continent. And then his physical appearance, walking, in a manner suggesting that he can barely stand. This has been going on for the last 5 years. And we have all been witnesses to that, which is why there have always been some accusations that some people have captured the president and they are holding him hostage. And those people are the ones that are making decisions. My problem with that proposition is that we have seen so many people change, including those people who supposedly have been holding the president hostage for a very long time, and the situation never changes. So I still believe that President Kiir is still in power, although the magnitude of his control over all the decisions in the country must be questioned. There has to exist a shadow government, individuals that do not hold any position of power, who are pulling all the tricks around the president. And this starts with cleaners in his house, in his office, to tea makers, to secretaries, to security details, and then now extending to his family and other relatives. It is clear that the formal institutions of government through which decisions are made are not working, especially decisions surrounding appointments of individuals or relief of individuals. I think the president doesn't really control that process entirely. And it is a question of, and the way President Kiir has always operated, he gives certain people that leverage for a sustained period of time before he falls out with them. And that they are able to appoint people, they are able to recommend people to be appointed. And so while my earlier position that President Kiir remains fully in charge has not changed, I must acknowledge that the mental capacity of the president must be questioned. And the physical capacity of the president must also be questioned. And there is a remedy in our own constitution. The constitution, Article 103, or is it Article 102, talks about the physical and mental incapacity of the president, what is supposed to happen. A national commission is supposed to examine the president and report to the parliament about the condition of the president. But knowing the reality of what is going on in Juba, obviously, you would have to be crazy if you are from the medical commission to think about that, unless a certain power bears on the president to allow himself to be examined. So I am deeply concerned, like you, that a shadow group of people are running the government. And President Kiir, you could say there may be times when he is able to understand what he is doing, but you could argue that there are many times when he is not fully in charge. And that situation we saw in Addis Ababa, if that is how President Kiir operates every day, I have a very good reason to be worried about my country being run by somebody in that mental capacity. I think the whole world was convinced that this was a disaster. And unfortunately, somebody has to pay for that. And so this is an opportunity to comment on the recent arrests on corruption. This was very much a story created to bury the mess that happened in Addis and to bury this story of the capacity of the president to function fully.
What is the connection?
Well, this is politics, right? So you go outside the country, you create a situation, and you appear badly, and people are now beginning to question whether you are in charge or not. You have to do something to show that you are in charge, and so the arrest of these people on alleged corruption is a direct response to that. And the president himself ordered this arrest. Although there are other individuals using their proximity to power to take in those people that they don't like, which is also part of this broader question of whether the president really has the capacity to function. So my take is that yes, there may have been corruption, and there has always been corruption, but the decision to act at the moment suggests that they took note of what happened in Addis and they want to kill that story by creating a much bigger story. And so these guys are victim of that situation in Addis.
Okay. So I wanted to ask something about the power vacuum, possible power vacuum, but I wanted to address something. I will read some comments from here later. So
Okay.
that's an alternative. We cannot see the comments here, but later on, for those of you who are watching, so I'm going to read some comments for Abraham to address later on, not now. I just wanted to let you know. So if you
Sure.
have some comments here, that's an alternative. I'll just look on my phone. I can see some comments here. But I want to go back to what you were just talking about in terms of whether the president is in charge. And we know there's something going on. We don't know what that is. So my fear is power vacuum. And power vacuum is worse than any totalitarian leadership. And we've seen this in Middle East. We've seen this in Iraq. We've seen this in Syria and in Libya. So if the president doesn't think in terms of succession, anyone, whether it's someone in the family or someone within the SPLM, that bothers me because that would be the end of South Sudan. Because the people, the shadow group that you're talking about can come up and that would be a really, really power struggle. So is this something you see also as a problem in terms of power vacuum, possible for power vacuum?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I completely agree entirely with you that the greatest threat to South Sudan right now is not rebellion. It is the sudden disappearance and absence of President Kiir from power because he has successfully killed the party. We are aware of this. I know my brothers and sisters, diehard SPLM supporters would not agree with me, but I saw this close, at a very close range. There is no SPLM that we know. And if the events that occurred recently don't demonstrate that, when those of Waniga, Daniel Awed, and Kolmanyang were very much trash, and somebody was raised and brought to power very quickly, only to be put in the dustbin, then you really, if that doesn't tell you anything about the nature and the state of the party, then you really are not paying attention. So what does the law say? Let us look at it through the law. What does the law say if the president is absent? Well, our transitional constitution says that in the event that the president become absent, either through mental incapacity or death, then the vice president takes over only for 60 days. And then an election has to be held. So that is one. We know that there is no election. And the constitution does not have remedy. If the vice president takes over, 60 days is over, what happens? We are not going to have an election, obviously. So that is one problem. But there is even a bigger problem. The revitalized peace agreement, which has been incorporated into the constitution, recognizes 4 vice presidents. And they are said to be equal. There is no remedy as to which of these vice presidents will take over. The agreement also further said that the SPLM, which is the party of the president, would have the opportunity to elect somebody within 48 hours to replace the president. And so now, if you want to understand why this is complicated, first, who is going to call the meeting for people to decide who is going to be the vice president? So there are 4 vice presidents, Riek not being one of them because he's first vice president. But in essence, we have Waniga, we have Taban Denga, and we have Rebecca Nyandeng. They are now members of the SPLM. Let's leave Hussein Abdelbagi out of it. But he also could claim that he's a vice president, and the constitution recognized him as one of the people who could take power. Now, who is going to call the party meeting to make that decision? That is one question you need to deal with. Number 2, who is going to hold power at that time while the replacement has not been found? Is it the security? Is it the political party? So those are questions that you can see that there is a crisis right there. What if one of the people call the party meeting and nobody agrees and say, we don't recognize you as the leader to call the party? What if that what if that happens? What if the military say everybody goes to that meeting and then they arrest everybody? What if the military units don't agree with each other? What if somebody from the family says, he's in charge now or she's in charge now until the party sits? These are questions that the Constitution is so confused that the Constitution is not going to provide a remedy. And the political structure and the way the president has set up the government and the security is such that each person serves the president by undermining the other person. So because the way they become loyal to him is that the head of national security must work against the chief of defense so that the chief of defense become more loyal to the president and against the head of national security as well, and so on and so forth. So the way President Kiir rules is that, I don't know, this could also be true in his family. He brings one person and then appoint an opposition to that person to report on that person and to fight to push that person out so that they can come in. So in that divided house, should anything, God forbid, should anything happen suddenly, and the process for identifying the next leader is contested, you have chaos. And that is very much what we are worried about.
There's a piece that was written recently by Ian for The Conversation, and he did talk about that. The agreement says 48 hours for SPLM to come up with a candidate to replace the president, 48 hours. And then the Constitution says, I think, is it 6 months or 3 months? I'm not sure, about 3 months or 6 months.
60 days to...
60 days, okay.
Yeah, there was an assumption in the Constitution that the vice president was supposed to be one.
Okay.
And therefore, they automatically take over and they have power for 60 days until an election is held.
Here's another question that Ian was raising. What if SPLM fails to produce a candidate in 48 hours and then we are in like 72 hours? What happens then?
That is exactly my worry. So that is violent contestation for power. That's very much what it means. The one with the bigger guns wins. But for how long? They could win today, but tomorrow somebody else may find a bigger gun and they win again, and you keep winning and losing, keep losing and keep winning. And of course, we are talking about disintegration of the country. And so what this means is that, Dr. Garang, is that we need people who have the courage in the country to really demand beforehand a clear path.
Okay. So that brings me to a question that was asked. Matai Deng asked a question.
Okay.
He says, Abraham, is there any local solution that we could do as citizens to remove the government in Juba? We have tried war but failed. Any local solution? That's coming from Matai Deng.
PCC has called for popular uprising. Popular uprising is what usually sets the country out of an unbreakable political situation. And the report of the South Sudan National Dialogue clearly diagnosed this and say we have unbreakable political stalemate in the country, and the country is not going to move forward unless the two leaders resign. And of course, the other reading, which is my reading, is that unless the people of South Sudan take the matters into their own hand. But even that, there are, of course, drawbacks to it, unless you do that in concert with the military, and unless there is a well-organized political system to take charge immediately, you could also, the whole thing could descend into chaos. So we have waited for too long, and we have allowed one person to become the institution. And removing him or his absence just throw the country into disaster. But there is a remedy. The remedy now is to prevail on President Kiir to step aside. He has mentally declined and he has physically declined. We have to accept that. We have seen it. We have seen it in life, in front of us. To step aside and allow the country to have a meaningful transition. This was the recommendation of the South Sudan National Dialogue. 20 years in power, If he is really a patriot, if he really likes this country, if he fought really to liberate these people that he claimed to have liberated, this is the time now to do the needful, which is to give himself time, maybe 12 months, and give space for the country to make peaceful democratic transition. Because that's the only thing that does not take us to chaos, is to make a transition that he accepts and that he allows to happen. Without that, I think the other scenarios are not good. Popular uprising, yes, it will take time until stability is restored. Opposition getting guns and getting the support, and then they capture the government and win. It will take time to destabilize the country if we take that out, and it is a real possibility. Or stage a bloody coup being staged, given the way security is set up in Juba. There is no way you can achieve bloodless coup. That one also is terrible for the country. And of course, the elections that they are talking about could only be meaningful if the president decides not to run and if he opens up political space for everyone else to participate. Then we will get the world support, the regional support, and we could have a peaceful democratic transition. Anything short of that, we are sitting on a time bomb.
Maybe I'm being pessimistic, but I see that President Kiir will accept that and say, okay, I'm going to step aside for the country, is something that is not going to be possible. I don't see him doing that anytime soon. Now, the alternative is for the family and for SPLM to be able to say, okay, this is where we are going. It is no longer about regime change. It's about the country. If they are not interested in having someone from outside coming to power, then they can choose someone they can control. They can put a figurehead they can control, as long as we have a new leadership. But I don't see the president doing something like that anytime soon.
I agree with you.
How can SPLM and the family do this?
Well, first of all, let us really forget about the SPLM. It is not going to happen. Okay, so just like President Kiir cannot say that he is going to step down because he just does not have that courage, and he also doesn't have that patriotic heart anymore. It is all about him. At the SPLM, President Kiir has beaten all the SPLM leaders into submission. So I don't see anybody coming out soon to do that. Perhaps the only thing that could save us is for the security sector to say that we need to have a democratic transition right now, and those are the people with the power and the guns. But anything short of that, but to achieve that also is very difficult because they are antagonistic to one another, toward one another. But if they can read the political environment clearly and to see the danger that the country is going through, or the calamity that is awaiting the country, even though we are already in a disaster because of violence and because of economic decline, the peaceful options are sort of out of reach at the moment. But you never rule anything out in politics. So that is our hope.
Here's the issue with I'm terrified of the security sector because there was something Thomas Sankara said about a soldier who doesn't have an ideology is basically a criminal. I'm really terrified about our security leaders. Do they have I'm afraid to say this is going to sound really bad, the intellectual capacity, the ideological grounding to be able to say we'll take over power, but we'll organize the country and then hand it over to civilian leaders? Do they have that kind of thinking, or would they say, oh, we have the power now, let us just enjoy it? As you see them, do they have that kind of capacity to be able to do that?
Well, you would hope so, because the current leaders in the security sector, as opposed to the previous times, previous times people were very much warlords, but these guys were below the line. They are still warlords in their own right, but you could argue that yes, there are officers that are trained, and they have some ideological understanding of how to build a nation. There are a significant number of them, but they don't have the power in their hands unless they do unless the junior officers take over. Yeah, but I hear you. It is not an ideal it is not an ideal option, because if they make a coup, it will be a bloody coup. But what I was intending to say was that they saying, from our perspective as military leaders, South Sudan has gone on for too long. We cannot do this anymore. You have to make a decision now to make a political transition, or we are going to take action. And if they do that unified and defy orders, because they could be decreed out, then now you could have a situation where the political leaders may be able to listen. But in order for them to do that, they need to do that in collaboration with the citizens. The citizens really have to demand it. This is usually the way it is. The citizens demand that there has to be a political transition in the country. And then the military leaders saying, okay, we heard the citizens and we think that they are right. We should, the political leaders, you have a window of opportunity to turn things around, or we are going to side with citizens. I think that is usually the better way. But the most ideal thing is for the leadership to make the transition themselves and participate in that transition. It serves the country better. But people have to be patriotic to do that. We have seen this being done with Joe Biden. When he froze at the debate with President Trump, the leaders of Democratic Party came out and said, Mr. President, we love you so much and we elected you to be our president. But at this point, you cannot handle this. This assignment is too much for you. This is the time for leaders to do this. President Kiir is, the longer he stays in power, the more humiliated he becomes and the more the country loses prestige and dignity. It's not about not liking President Kiir anymore. It is very much about saving him and his dignity. You cannot have a leader go out there in front of the whole world to freeze, to be able to not be able to articulate himself and not be able to physically move. It's okay. You can get on a wheelchair. That's fine. It doesn't mean that when you are on a wheelchair, you cannot lead. But you ought to be able to articulate yourself. You ought to be able to talk to your people and think. If you cannot think, if you cannot articulate, it suggests that you are not able to think. And that is where my concern is. So the time has really come for the country to unite around this idea that the time for President Kiir to go home is now. And the longer we delay, the more danger we ought to expect.
There's a question that I think we can assume the answer before we even address it. It's a question from Alakir. Why is the parliament, I think, not conducting inquiry into the president's health and physical ability to perform? I think that would be scary.
That is a very legitimate question. But do you have a parliament? There is no parliament in South Sudan. We have political appointees whose main job is to stay together in power with President Kiir, but not to legislate. And to the extent that they can legislate, they'll only legislate what the president wants them to. And when they complain a lot, they get paid off. And so we really have no representative parliament, a parliament that represents the will of the people of South Sudan and their constituencies. We have political appointees appointed by the president, and they are serving him, not the country. Otherwise, there should have been, since that incident on the opening of the road, of course, I'm not going to repeat it here, but that incident that occurred on the way to Terkega, that was the time. That was the time that decline became visible in the public. But for those who have been close to the president, they have known that decline has started way longer than that.
Okay. Here's another question from David Mabura, Tim, about the recent decision by Honorable Atang Okwal to review the operations of Crawford Capital, and then the decision by the vice president to question it. So he's asking about your views on that.
Well, if that doesn't show you that we have a dysfunctional government, then there is nothing that can. First of all, Atong is the one in charge of trade, and if she feels that there is a certain company, if that is assuming the company was contracted by her ministry, then it is within her capacity to to raise questions about the company and to review the contract. But if the company was contracted through other channels that did not come through her ministry, then you could say that she has overstepped her power. But for the vice president to go and revoke that decision suggests that the government is dysfunctional. So somebody is being protected, obviously, through that company, and we know who the person is, and perhaps the vice president could have been pressured to issue that statement, knowing that he could be removed if he doesn't. And we have seen people being removed and appointed to various positions. So I think Atong was right in being able to say, I want to review this contract. There are allegations of corruption and other related matters, but the pressure was brought to bear on her through the Vice President for Economic Cluster. Yes.
So there are two questions that I want you to address. One is about the popular uprising, and this is something I've talked to some guests about. For popular uprising to materialize, this is coming from Nyan Wing. Since we are not united,
Nyan Wing, but not Un Wing. So okay. Okay. Yeah.
So to call for popular uprising, we need to be united as one. How do we erase the tribal lines so we can work together?
I personally think that this issue of tribalism is overplayed. It is an excuse for inaction. Because suffering people don't suffer according to their tribes. So if the economy declines, it affects all the tribes. If insecurity declines, it affects all the tribes. Nobody is safe in South Sudan, including the government officials themselves. We have seen, when the government rules are arbitrary, that's what you have seen, the chaos. People try to be arrested and people trying to run away because they don't know. There is no procedure. There is nothing to be followed. Could be some random people arresting people to go and torture them. Yeah, so I personally think that the reason uprising has not happened is not because we are divided. It is because we have not made a decision to challenge this government as citizens. Because when those of us in the PCCA decided to challenge the government, we did it together. We did not say, these guys are from the other tribe, these are from other group. No, we simply said we are fed up and we want to speak up for our country. And we did it together as a group of people from different ethnic communities. So I think this issue of ethnicity is part of the toolbox of the government to advance that people are divided. So if people protest now, they are going to fight each other. No, that is false. They are not angry toward one another. They are angry with the government. A government that saw the entire custom market burned down and they were not able to come to anybody's rescue. And up to now, nothing has been done to those citizens who lost everything on that fateful night. That's a government that they saw. A government that they saw people butchered recently in Biemno in large numbers. And they were not able to do anything about it. A government that is responsible for massive displacement of people right now in Jonglei. That's the government that we are talking about. And it is not a government it doesn't help anybody. Everybody is suffering. And so if the citizens of South Sudan have actually made up their mind that they are going to challenge this government, because they keep waiting. I get people call me sometime and say, where is America? Why can't America do anything? South Sudan is not an American country. It is our country. We have to rise up and do something about it and challenge the authority of the government that has failed us time and again. And if anybody is willing to help us, they will find us helping ourselves. And so the issue of tribalism does not apply when it comes to popular uprising. It is when citizens have decided that they have had enough. When that time happens, it will simply, for example, when our people were killed in Wad Medani, thousands of citizens went out on a riot and burning things, and they were not very happy, and they were from different tribes. they were able to do it successfully. So I challenge all citizens that unless you are not suffering because of the results of this government, if you are suffering, you have to challenge this government. It is not a fate. You are not designed or you are not assigned to completely suffer forever. No, you can get rid of a government that is making you suffer. And that is very much why we were against the government of Khartoum. They were doing exactly the type of things that they are being done in Juba, and even worse. So yes, I challenge all the citizens that tribalism is irrelevant. We must end this suffering now, and we can do it collectively.
Okay. So for those of you commenting, if I don't read your comment, it's because maybe Abraham has already addressed it. There's one question here about the C5. Could you please clarify whether there is a timeline for the commencements of the peace negotiation under the supervision of C5 or AU?
Well, as soon as the CPI meeting happened in Addis, there appeared to have been some sort of momentum toward it, but since then, it's been silent. There is nothing. There is no Tumaini, there is no C5. And we understand the government doesn't want it. And so if the government doesn't want it, we are unlikely to see it. And so we should really not raise our hopes on the initiative of C5. I think that initiative is being resisted in Juba. And if it is being resisted in Juba, we are unlikely to see it materialize. And the Kenyan mediation has given up on Tumaini. They have given the file to the C. Yes.
There are some more related questions about SPLM. There's one from David Alak. If there is no SPLM party, as you mentioned, then who is behind the ruling party? So that's one. There's another one that is related to that from Gadwich Raj. What about a small guy, a Kolopol of SPLM, would reform SPLM? So you say there's no SPLM, but then we have the Secretary General, and then so who is behind the ruling party now if there's no SPLM?
Well, that is a very good question. First of all, yes, there is a party called SPLM. It is registered and it is there. It's nominal, but it is not ruling. It is a misnomer actually to call it a ruling party. There is a ruling family and there is a ruling man, but there is no ruling party in South Sudan as we speak. The SPLM doesn't sit down and make decisions who is going to be fired today, who is going to be hired tomorrow. That decision doesn't come to the party. For you to actually rule as a party, it is your program that you design, and then you bring in your cadres who are going to run it. That's when you are called a ruling party. The SPLM right now, first of all, does not have a political or economic program that the government uses. The nomination and appointment of people and firing of people doesn't involve the SPLM. And so what I can say is that the position of the SPLM Secretary General is performative. There is no power behind it. And I have a lot of respect for Korfol. He's an intellectual and he's somebody that has ideological orientation, and he could do a wonderful job if he's allowed. First of all, if he becomes president, he would be a great president. I have no problem with that. If he has power to reform the SPLM, he could do a good job. And there are many other SPLM leaders that I have a lot of respect for. What I'm saying is that they just don't have power right now. They are just performative. They are there to make the party legible, to make the party appear like, there is a government and there is a ruling party. But in substance, there is nothing. They have nothing to contribute to many of the decisions that are made in the country. Because if there was a ruling party, you would not have ministries of finance coming in and out. Because for somebody to be appointed a minister of finance is to implement an economic program, economic policy of the party. And it has a certain length of time to implement that. But we have seen it's a revolving door, today, tomorrow. So there is no ruling in that. These are decisions made on a ad hoc basis, but there is nothing systematic. That is something that I know. I'm not guessing. I know for sure what I'm talking about. And I have spoken to SPLM leaders in the Political Bureau and in the the Liberation Council, as well as the Secretariat. They are completely relevant to the decisions made on governance in South Sudan. That I know. The SPLM could still become a ruling party, but I don't see that happening under the leadership of President Salva Kiir. So that is my challenge. So the SPLM cannot sit, for example, and tell President Kiir that the time for him to make a transition has come. That meeting will never take place, and if it ever takes place, it will be done in the dark room, but it will never be communicated. Everybody is scared of that. Yeah, that's what I can say.
So I agree with you. I think SPLM has incredible leaders. They are not just given the chance. When I talked to Guy Mayen, and he was in parliament, and he did talk, there are good SPLM leaders in parliament. People who are very skilled, people who are very smart, who can actually do something for the South Sudan. So, and this is not coming from an SPLM member. It's coming from an SPLM-IO member. So
Absolutely.
that is true. The other thing, the other thing comes from Lual Dao of UPA, and he also said he talks to SPLM to government officials, and he says these people are smart. They know what they're doing, but there is a limit as to what they can do in the context of power. So, and that is our challenge. So we're coming towards the end. I want to appreciate you again. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and you can see people are always interested to hear from you. So what is your final word? You can choose from all the things we have discussed.
Well, what I can say is that to the listeners and to the people of South Sudan in general, is that if we truly care about our country, and if we truly believe that the reason we had to have this country was to improve the lives of our people, we have to be convinced, all of us now, that we have not achieved that. We have actually made the lives of our people worse. Our children are still being born in East Africa, in Cairo, in Khartoum, in Uganda, and other places, and being raised there, including my own children. They are not being raised in their own country. We are still running. We are still living in refugees camps, in Gambela, in Kakuma, in Uganda, in Congo, and other places. And we are seeing our young men making desperate journeys. For the first time in the history of South Sudan, our young people are making desperate journeys through Libya to try to go to Europe. They have given up on their country. If these things are true, then the time has come for us to stop it. And it is within our capacity to do this. President Kiir has nothing left in the bag to pull out to make things right. He has reached the limit of his capacity, and he is declining mentally and physically. And as much as we love him to continue, as he declines, the country is also declining. And we should not celebrate the fact that there is war going on and government is winning, SPLM-IO is winning. Those are all, there is nothing helpful in those. What we need right now is peace and a democratic transition. And we can demand this as citizens of South Sudan. We can demand that through popular action, or we can demand that simply by speaking out, like I am doing right now. This is our duty. We are required to defend our country. We bow according to our national anthem to protect our nation. We are not protecting our nation right now. We are breaking it apart. We are pulling it apart, killing our own citizens. We are displacing our own citizens. We are destroying the property and wealth of our people. And this is enough. We are no longer fighting with the Arabs. We are alone. We can bring this to an end. And violence, we have seen enough of it. And President Kiir, that's what he lives for. He likes to fight. So the type of fight that we are calling for is popular citizens fight, demanding things to be reformed. That's all we need at this time. And we have to put aside the fact that we are born from different ethnic groups, or we have different religions, or we come from different regions. We are citizens of South Sudan and we have equal stake. The year 2026 should mark the end of all the crises in our country. And the longer we wait, God forbid, should anything happen to President Kiir, we will lose the country. It will take us 30 years, 40 years to turn things around. But right now, it is doable. And I'm calling on the SPLM leaders to really find courage. And also on President Kiir's family and relatives to find courage to end this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Really, this is really great. We'll always have you back. And you can see someone made a comment that we should have Awolwich every week. So it may not be possible because he's busy.
Yes, but I look forward to chatting and definitely being able to share ideas. And I appreciate you for making this space available.
Thank you. So everyone, thank you. We're signing off airs.